start off with a warm welcome. Thank you all for joining us today at this webinar. So we're going to have a really interesting taster lecture from Michael Etter in a moment around crisis communication. So Mike, if we could just go to the next slide, just to give everyone a very brief overview of kind of the next hour. Very brief introduction from myself and others, just a little bit about what we do at King's Business School, the main event with Michael, and then just a little bit of information from us about kind of the other stuff that King's does. So I'm very pleased to introduce myself. My name's Kate Foreman. I'm the head of executive program development here at the business school. And we're developing and run all sorts of really cool executive education elements. Also, just to introduce, I'll give Michael a proper introduction in a moment, if that's all right, but just to introduce briefly my colleague Sarah Hayton, who you will also see. Sarah works with us and probably has talked to many of you and will talk to many of you if you're interested in doing executive education with us or finding out more. So there'll be contact details throughout this. If you want to have a chat with us and an informal discussion about professional development, then you will most likely talk to Sarah and she'll be very happy to talk to you about that as well. So if just a very brief introduction on the next slide, if we may, to King's Business School. We, as you hopefully know, King's has a great brand and a great name and really fascinating institution. We've been educating for a long time. So we're very much around our groundbreaking research, and we're really certain that kind of what we do and the value of our university and our business and management expertise is that everything we do is research and evidence based. And our mission around that is to help people improve the way they do business. And our wider mission as a college is around helping the world to be a better place through that. So within the business school, we're very much focused on, giving people the right leadership and development and professional skills to, impact your organization and the world as part of that. And we engage with lots of organizations to do this. So that's through our courses, but we also do kind of custom pieces of work and big research projects. And, most days you'll probably see King's in the news, which is fantastic. And, that we've played a big role in all sorts of areas of life. We're also actually, the business school is one of the largest management institutions in London. And we regularly rank very highly for our business and management expertise, which we're really proud of. So very established and great university, and we're really proud of that. Within that, we're also, wanting to let people know that we offer executive education, and we're doing, for obvious reasons, a lot of virtual executive education this year, but we also run in-person courses, and we're looking forward to welcoming executives back to our campus later in the year when that's more possible. And for those of you that are already affiliated with King's, so if you've done your undergrad or postgrad degree with us as an alum, our executive education also offers discounts to recognise that continuing relationship. So that's just something that we like to flag so that people are aware that you may have studied with a different department within King's, but we're very happy to welcome you into the business school. And we'll talk at the end of this around some of the things that we are doing more specifically in the coming months, but executive education is very suitable for people with some years of management experience or work experience, maybe moving into management and wanting to develop that further, as well as, people who've got lots of experience but want to kind of work on specific skills. So as I said at the beginning, my colleague Sarah and others of us, we're always very happy to have informal discussions with people about their professional ambitions and kind of where potentially King's executive education can help you to realise those ambitions. And there's contact details there, but you can also find all of our information on the website. So very open to those discussions if you're thinking about next steps for yourself and want to have a chat. So I will stop there. If we go to the next slide, I am much more excitingly delighted to introduce you to Dr. Michael Etter, who is one of our senior lecturers in entrepreneurship and digitalisation, and he's going to lead us through the substantive part of today, talking about today's topic. And as noted here, he's got a very interesting background. So Michael, if I hand over to you, I might let you do a better introduction of yourself and share a bit more about yourself and get into the meat of today, if that's okay.
Thank you, Kate. Yes, the introduction was already quite good. Thank you. So there's so much I can add. I'm a senior lecturer at King's College London. I do research on digital tools, I do research on crisis communication. I also have been practitioner, worked in PR for some industries which are typically handling with negative perceptions, such as tobacco, banking industry, and also political parties. And my research is very much on digital tools and reputation, legitimacy, so intangible assets which are important for organizations. Today, I'm going to take you through a little teaser taster of crisis communication management in the digital age. I typically teach with cases, with a lot of interaction, group work. We're not going to do this today, but I promise if you sign up for a masterclass, it's going to be much more interactive and engaging. So I hope you enjoy a little bit of the information of today. I'm going to talk for half an hour. If I talk longer than that, please, Kate, interrupt me simply. All right. So when we talk about crisis and digital age, obviously social media is something that we need to talk about. And that's something also we address in our masterclass. Now, crises are very unpleasant event, obviously, for organizations, corporations, but also governments, NGOs, etc. And unexpected events that create a negative impact on trust and reputation, so important intangible assets that organizations need to relate positively to their stakeholders. In crisis, we typically have high uncertainty, and stakeholders need information. And this information void is filled with different information. And typically in the old age, let's say before the big digital transformation, the sources of information were relatively easy to spot. And obviously through social media, 300 million Twitter users, 2 billion people on Facebook, etc. There's much more sources of information that can fill this information void in a time of very high uncertainty. So part of my lecture will now or today particularly focus on this social construction of a crisis by different sources. So it's not only the news media anymore, but obviously a lot of other digital sources. And you're all aware of fake news, misinformation, algorithms that push these wrong information, etc. So that's something to consider. Now, when we look at crisis, because they're unexpected, we cannot really plan for them, but it's always good to have certain frameworks in place. And that's actually what the course is for. It will provide you with certain frameworks so you can, at least once you are in a crisis situation, to assess the crisis and possibly also react to crisis. As you can imagine, speed is quite important, and particularly also with social media that has really accelerated the speed of information transmission very substantially. So organizations have very early started to learn this. You are probably aware with a lot of different cases. One I like to use is the Barilla case, which was one of the earlier one, and really showed how the game has changed. So Barilla, what happened, the former chairman of Barilla, Italian pasta brand, by the way, if you probably know, a former chairman of Barilla has given a little interview in Italy on a radio station, small radio station, and mentioned in passing that Barilla doesn't target, that Barilla targets traditional families with their marketing, with their advertising. This sentence was then picked up by the Twitter community and was framed in a way that Barilla doesn't support gay marriage or is against gay marriage. It was retweeted, of course, very quickly. Went viral, very quickly went to the US. The US market for Barilla very quickly picked up online, and then also news media picked up on these things. And before Barilla knew, certain supermarket chains would take the Barilla out of the shelf, their pasta. So a lot of questions I get from practitioners. I mean, are social media, how important are they? What are the effects? Do we really have, there's a lot of noise, but it might also, it's just a flare, but it can have substantive effects. So for Barilla, they really lost reputation in the US after that, and they really had to put considerable efforts into rebuilding their reputation in the US, particularly when it comes to these kind of topics. And this shows us also that in Twitter, you don't have Twitter users actually ringing up Barilla and asking for a statement. What did he actually mean by this statement? What is your official take on gay marriage, for example, etc. So obviously Twitter users are not journalists. They don't work with the same professional ethos. They don't have fact checking. They're not interested in a balanced reporting, objectivity. So all these journalism values. Twitter obviously works completely different with a lot of emotions very quickly. and the community is very strongly important, and that's what we're going to look at later more systematically. Another case I use, also early case, iPhone 7. Apple is known to be very good at controlling their communication. They're very good through all communication channels, even their architecture, their stores. You're familiar with them. I mean, they're really controlling the message. But in social media, obviously, even Apple can lose the control. This was when they announced the new headphones, or the iPhone 7 headphones without cable. Very quickly, false mock-ups of the phone appeared on social media, went viral. There's obviously a lot of humor. Humor makes information go viral. Emotions in general, we know from research, emotions make information go very quickly, very fast and far, with far reach. And I mean, you will ask yourself, is this a crisis or not? Probably not a crisis here, but probably not so happy about when wrong information, pictures of your supposed product appear on social media and is mocked. The question, of course, is is it a crisis or not? And that's also something we're going to look into today. I worked with organizations over the last 10 years, also made some consultancy in adopting digital media. And at the very beginning, it was, organizations were quite afraid, actually. And still today, some have still a very traditional understanding of communication, top down, very planned, controlling the message. And when it comes to digital tools, a lot of organizations still do fear this loss of control and fear the tensions they can evoke, fears of unplanned communication. And I'm sure you've seen yesterday the tweet by Burger King, who tried to somehow engage with International Women's Day with a tweet. And they tweeted basically, "Women belong into the kitchen." And the take was then basically they supporting women to be actually, professionally successful by becoming chefs in the kitchen. Didn't really work out for them really well. A lot of unplanned communication, a lot of critique still. And that happens all the time. There are multiple examples. I use a lot of examples in my teaching. So there is this, there's this sense of loss of control, and how can we do this? And particularly in crises, this is obviously a very strong factor that needs to be considered. Again, with traditional media, we can ring up a journalist. Typically, organizations have established relationships with journalists. They can approach them. Journalists themselves has a certain professional ethos. They want to make balanced, etc., objective reporting. And then also this openness is somehow counterintuitive and clashes often with hierarchical structures and reporting systems in organizations. I have worked with pharmaceutical companies that tried to engage with social media, tap their feed into Twitter because they didn't want to do blogs because it's too interactive. And what turned out, so pharmaceutical companies, typically their external communication always goes through legal, goes through certain processes, has to be approved, etc. And obviously that doesn't work with Twitter. Also, working hours, just working from 9 to 5. Doesn't work either. Social media keeps working globally all of the time. So organizations really have to rethink. And also when it comes to crises, so you have to be quick. What are the processes that you need to react fast? So that's important and something to learn. And then finally, what I've seen a lot as well is budget allocations, how much money is spent on these channels, where, and in terms of manpower, but also the financial resources. That's always a discussion. It's also interesting to have and also to hear. And we have students in executive classes, and they exchange their experience on that. So that's always interesting to hear. Now, I mentioned this before. Is it actually a crisis? And when we look at traditional media, so let's say we go back before social media, and a lot of research has been done on crises, and news media are obviously very important because, again, a crisis is socially constructed. It is mediated by many actors. It is amplified, but it can also be suppressed by actors that we might not have control over. And news media are obviously one very important actor. Now, not everything is a crisis, obviously. Bad news isn't a crisis. So when does bad news become a crisis? And here we also know from research And this has a lot to do with on the side of the receiver, because a crisis is also about perceptions. How do we perceive a crisis? And for a crisis to exist, there needs to be continuously and also coherent negative news, consistently negative news, to actually persuade the public that other members of the or people that other members of the public also disapprove an organization. So with our judgments, we are often not quite sure how should we judge actually an organization. Become very secure in a judgment when we have the feeling that other people also disapprove of an organization. And how do we get this feeling is when we encounter a lot of negative information, typically through news media. And as soon as we have starting to have mixed messages, this can lead to doubt. If there was negative behavior, how certain is the responsibility of an organization in a crisis? There's different kinds of crisis. A crisis can be intentional, so the responsibility is very much on the organization itself. But a crisis can also be an accidental crisis. Things can happen. It might not be the mistake of an organization. An organization can be even a victim of a crisis. It might not be their fault. And that's very important. What kind of responsibilities attributed to the organization for a crisis situation? And again, this attribution is something that can be socially constructed. A good example of this is, for example, when it comes to suppliers. Let's say Apple again, they had a few years ago some issues with their suppliers, Foxconn, where we had human rights violations. And the question was always, is Apple responsible for this human rights violation or not? And that's very much a negotiation in the public sphere. Do we hold Apple responsible for this behavior, for these things? Okay, one too fast. And then what's important also on the stakeholder side, are stakeholders actually interested in information? Do they want to accept, process information, and to make a judgment about an organization, to lose trust, to lose or to decrease the reputational judgment in an organization? That's also important. Now, why are stakeholders interested in information? It's fairly simple. It has to do with threats and benefits. So the perceived threat, of course, motivates us to pay more attention to information, to seek more information, to process information. And threats can be, on the one hand, physical threats to our well-being, to our physical integrity. Obviously, some crises are about physical threats. This can go from product malfunction to larger, obviously, crises. Economic threats have to do, do we lose some money in one way or the other? Financial threat or social threats. And I think this is maybe the most interesting. In some of the crises that are these days, they are always accompanied with social threats. So is an organization acting in a way that really violates societal norms? So is an organization acting against socially accepted norms? And how do we deal with this? And again, this is something that is also negotiated depending on information that we receive and have. And news media play an important role here. So this is the traditional view. So not everything becomes a crisis. And of course, if you are in a possible crisis situation, it's very important to monitor the news media. Now, how is it with social media? Yes, we have a lot of storms. Some call them firestorms. Here we have a hurricane. Things flare up. They might also disappear again. Here becomes even more important. How can we monitor? How can we understand this? Is it a crisis or not? And often, if you're sitting inside an organization, things might appear bigger than they actually are. The outside perspective might look quite different than when we sit in an organization. And again, this can lead to quite some uncomfortable feelings when you are in an organization handling with social media accusations. How do you do this? And this is something that we address in our executive education here and look at certain strategies how to handle that. Now, one term for a crisis that actually is not a crisis is paracrisis. So Coombs a researcher came up with this term. It's basically a visibility of a challenge. So some behavior of an organization is called out on social media. It's done very quickly. Everyone can type into their keyboard. When other people are also unhappy with particular behavior, they might jump on and something can really ignite a fire or a storm. So it's really about the claim about irresponsible behavior. And important here is the claim. So it's really a claim, okay, you're doing something wrong, here's something not right. The question, does it need a crisis team? Does it need a crisis mode? Good question. And again, this has to do with how big does it get? It sounds fairly simple, but it's really something to monitor. And the question is really how many stakeholders really buy into this. So it becomes a crisis when a wider range of stakeholders are attending to this particular concern. Now, there are ways, obviously, to try to diminish that, but one also has to be careful. Depending on the situation, addressing a crisis can also make it bigger. Again, and depending on how you address the crisis online can make it bigger. Not talking about it can also make it bigger. So, and this is something we're going to look at in the executive masterclass. So evaluating different crises and how can we react to different crisis situations. But important, obviously, the defining moment is when a wider range of stakeholders are attending to this particular concern. And this can go from basically more and more people on social media to celebrities, to politicians, news media picking it up, etc., etc. The response, so let's go into communication and management. The response traditionally, it has to do with how is a crisis perceived. I mentioned this before, the different crisis types. We can distinguish between different clusters. A very prominent way of looking at this is a victim crisis, where the organization is a victim of a crisis. It's not their fault. Nevertheless, something can happen. It can really influence the operations of a particular firm. Let's say a power outage for an airline, and therefore the airline has to ground for 2 days. This can happen. The question is then how much responsibility. It can be an accident where there might be certain responsibility with the organization, but it's not intentional. It's not something that is with bad intention, where a certain moral or immoral benefit was sought by the organization. The worst is obviously the intentional crisis, where we have unethical behavior, unacceptable behavior that has led to a crisis situation. And depending on the perception and how the crisis is constructed by different sources, it needs different responses. And as a general rule, the stronger the responsibility and the intention is seen on the organization, the stronger needs to be, the more accommodative needs the response to be. Obviously, apologizing up to, people get fired in crisis, right? So really showing, okay, this is the root of the problem. We're getting rid of the root of the problem. Something to look into. So this is more a traditional response, which is quite a rational approach to crisis, with the perception that people are judging based on information, can make clear judgments, also based on traditional understanding of news media, where journalists very much control the disclosure of the negative firm events, where you have spokesperson press releases, where you basically as organization can engage with journalists, again, who have the professional ethos and work as journalists, at least compared to social media, where we have a completely different picture. Where we have these journalistic norms of fairness and balance. And a lot of the course is going to be about these differences. How do you handle news media? How do you handle social media? Two completely different kind of games, which also start to merge more and more. Obviously, we have journalists and news media, etc. And we have bloggers who almost become journalists, citizen journalists. Now, response on social media, what is different? I already mentioned, so obviously people on social media are not journalists, they are not bound to professional ethics. Also, a journalist can get sued, or the newspaper can get sued for wrong information. So people don't care usually so much if they write something wrong on social media. There's a lot of rumors, a lot of wrong information. There are cases where organizations tried to sue people on social media. Always backfires. If you have a big organization obviously going after the little man or the little woman online who tries to expose bad behavior, even if there might be wrong information, it will backfire if the lawsuit like that comes again to the public, because it just creates this impression, the big against the small. What is different as well? So definitely the speed. So there's a great velocity. The initial example of Barilla showed that information can go very quickly. Obviously, national barriers don't don't stop information from traveling. It goes very fast. There's interconnected communities that that pass on information and really get passionate about something. So it's very fast dissemination, but also the production. So if you think about news media, to produce news media content, it's quite a complex process. A lot of people involved in editorial processes. That's obviously different. Social media goes very fast, very quick. And news media also have adapted, right? So news cycles have become quicker, have become faster. They need to adapt to this drive to being always faster, break with the latest news. So there's really this rush, and this obviously works a bit against an organization who has to keep up with the speed. Nevertheless, we will discuss, I don't think we have time today, sometime being slow can also be an advantage. And I'm just going to put it out quickly here, and we're going to discuss it more in the masterclass. So a more deliberate, slow response can actually also slow down the speed online, and how that works we will address in the masterclass. So I'm really teasing here, actually. What is different as well? So there's greater emotionality. So again, journalism, they write in a more balanced, maybe more neutral tone. They have a particular journalistic genre, the way they write. If you look at some of the UK newspapers, there's also quite a lot of emotion, but that's nothing compared, obviously, to social media, where we have very raw emotions. There's almost no filter, and people can express with various emotions. It goes from anger, but also humor and cynicism, etc., satire. So a lot of emotions that transport information, and information that comes through this emotion, it really goes faster. So emotion carries information. So there's definitely not this objectivity over emotionality dictator that we have in news media, and there's obviously also less censorship. Censorship may be also interesting. News media are economic organizations, so they are not only afraid of maybe being sued by an organization, but they also need to consider who are their readers, what is important for them, what is newsworthy, how do we sell more newspapers. Might also censor themselves because organization might also be their clients, because they need to they provide them with advertising money. So there's certain mechanism of censorship we have in news media, which is not so much the case with social media, where the censorship comes from somewhere else. I mean, people also self-censor on social media, but these are different mechanisms. It has more to do, who am I? How do I want to express myself? What is my identity? If my identity is the critical consumer that rages against organizations and stands for social justice, then I might jump on this particular campaign against Barilla because I really don't want organizations to be against gay marriage, for example. So there's also this greater commonality, which is important. So people connect on social media. There are communities that share particular norms and worldviews and support each other. So they have a collective identity, which is also different from journalists. I mean, journalists also have a collective identity, which is more professional. So they enact their professional identity as professionals through practices and norms. And in social media, the collective identity has to do with in-group, out-group. Do I belong to a particular group? What are our norms? How do we enact these norms through communication, through our behavior? Again, storming, again, speaking out against certain organization can be part of that collective identity and also personal identity. So there's a lot of commonality. And these three aspects, I would say, are important to consider when managing crisis. And the last one, it is often again us against them. So what I mentioned before, the big corporations against us, against the community. So based on that, we can look at different strategies. So if you understand how social media works in crises, I just want to mention one strategy here, which is called the proactive transparency strategy. The idea is here to actually prevent social disapproval. So to prevent basically negative opinions about organizations to not necessarily disseminate it, but to travel and maybe also surprise audiences. Oh, Barilla is against gay marriage, for example, right? It comes a bit as a surprise, obviously also a news value, information that is interesting. We might seek for more. We don't hear anything from Barilla, what's going on. And sometimes firm can have prior knowledge about possible harmful information that could go public. I'm thinking about organizations like the government, but also other organizations where there is an awareness of potentially information leaking. And One strategy here could be, and again, this depends very much on the situations, to be proactively transparent. So it's basically about providing information about the event and also obviously actions by the firm to fix the problem, make restitution. Again, a crisis situation is a situation of high uncertainty where information is needed. So put out the information there. Now, why is this helpful? If you look at these elements of velocity, emotionality, and communality, so if you look at velocity, it's about preventing the breaking of news by others. And by doing that, we're also able to frame the situation from the start as an organization, given a particular framing, at least from the start, which also then helps maybe also to suppress emotions a little bit, maybe through a particular framing, have it more analytical in the public domain, highlight certain things over others, which might prevent more emotional uproar. And then finally, if you look at the communality or the community, by maybe coming forward more transparent, this might also signal this voluntarily coming out with the information might signal certain integrity, which might prevent this us against them situations, which we also want to kind of avoid, to have this us against them situation, right? Okay. So this is one strategy very quickly. In the lessons, obviously in the masterclass, we're going to go much more in depth with that. What does it mean? In which situation can we do this? What does it actually mean in particular situations? And also look at examples and cases. Then there are several factors that need to be taken into account. One factor I think is very interesting, and I want to mention here, is the severity of events. So if you look at traditional crises, there's almost an objective measure for what is considered a crisis. And often it sounds terrible. It could be the amount of human loss, financial loss, and you can almost look at this on a scale. And that's a bit how news media work, right? They're looking for news value. Journalists are trained, have certain heuristics. What do they consider as interesting, potentially interesting for the readers? So they click on the link and they buy the newspapers. And that very much drives journalists to produce content. Environmental damage is something. How big is environmental damage? How close is it to a particular country? How surprising? So all these news values. So this really increases the likelihood that things are covered by the news media. So it's more an objective and measurable severity of events. Now, when you look at social media, you probably have seen this before yourself. I mean, things can really explode, small things. Someone breaks a guitar on an airplane, and I think that's one of the examples, the very examples. And airplanes are actually, I have a lot of airplane examples. So a guitar is broken by an airline, which definitely would make a news headline in newspaper. But things like that, if they caught on video, put somewhere online, or it resonates with people, they're also very unhappy with how airlines work because they provide very bad service. They trash things. People don't feel treated in the right way. So if it really resonates, little things like that can become very big. So it's really important, the resonance. How much does something resonate with the personal experience, with the personal values? And again, the violation of social norms, that's something that really drives a possible crisis situation. And topics are here, and we've seen this more and more over the recent years, and you're all aware of that. Issues related to race relation, gender issues, then a lot of political things like gun control, corporate power. If somehow perception is created that an organization has a stake in one of these or does something wrong in these directions, of course, these things are important, but they're less objectively measured, such as financial loss or human loss. So it's really more about the shared perceptions of an issue that acts as this social glue between these communities. And here the communality comes in again, and the emotionality that is very important, that drives this information online. And here, even it might not look as much from an organization. I mean, okay, we broke a guitar. It's still very important in these situations that you're very accommodative, that you have a very accommodative response that validate these concerns that are shared among a large community. On the other hand, it might mean that actually things that are objectively measurable and are actually quite big in their impact might be less emotional, might drive less resonance. if it's less important for individuals that are on social media for the norms, etc. A less accommodative response might actually work there in social media, at least. All right. So I think that's from my side. As I mentioned, typically I use a lot of case interaction, group work, etc. But I think it gives you a good understanding where we're heading with this masterclass. And yeah, if you have any question, please ask me. Kate, I give over to you.
Thank you. Well, we have had a couple of questions actually come in while you were talking. So maybe if I shout those out for you, it would be interesting to get your response, Michael, if that's perhaps if we start with Jazz's question, that was the first one. So Jazz has asked, how do leaders create trust when communicating and in times of crisis? When a crisis occurs, there's lots of uncertainty, and are there reputable approaches that leaders can take to promote a more trusting culture as opposed to a divided culture?
Divided culture.
Do you have any tips?
Yeah, so I mean, it reminds me of an interview I saw once. I'm from Switzerland, and Swiss Airline had a huge crash in Halifax. It's already quite a while ago, but I remember the crisis manager, she was a woman, and she basically elaborated her crisis response strategy. And she said transparency was so important in their case, that it was their fault, that they're very transparent about everything they did wrong, that they are very apologizing, that they wouldn't hold any information back. So I thought that was quite powerful, because typically we perceive organizations trying to somehow deceive audiences, to hold information back. And typically things like that come out, and this can sometimes be even worse than the crisis itself. So you have a crisis on top of the crisis, holding back information, being dishonest. And I think that's something, so the transparency in itself, I mean, because there's always a danger that, things come out anyway. I think that's, and that's definitely generated trust. And with also, you mentioned actually leaders, and I think the higher the severity of a crisis, the higher up it needs to be solved, right? And you typically see that when the CEO steps in a big crisis, obviously the CEO that comes forward and shows empathy, and a lot has to do, I mean, things like body language, tone, where is the person? When the BP crisis was, the former CEO of BP was on his yacht and giving answers from his yacht while the crisis were unfolding. Obviously, it sends very bad pictures. So there's a lot of symbolic things that you can actually control, and you need to be aware of in these crisis situations. So I think empathy is very important to communicate. This creates trust, transparency. The divided culture, I'm not sure if I understand that question so well.
Straying a bit into kind of leadership areas here as well. This kind of setting the culture for the organization. It's interrelated, I guess, as well, isn't it, with what we're talking about here? But
definitely, yes.
Maybe groundwork that has to be done before crisis.
Right. And that's actually something we will address as well. Yes, the role of leaders. Yeah.
There's if I may, actually, we'll jump to the most recent question, a second question from Huma. So, I think Huma works for a not-for-profit, if I've read correctly, and has asked, when deciding on collaborating with another company or organization, and if their reputation is somewhat commercial, or maybe not necessarily relating to your own organization, but there are benefits. How can you avoid a crisis in terms of reputation or critical commentary?
Yes.
This is centered around maybe a good financial relationship with another organization, but potentially, mission driven might not be quite the same fit. And have you got any advice there or thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that happens a lot. And the problem is that the perception, if you have an alliance, if two things appear together, there's always this spillover effect. And it's something we cannot avoid. It's a heuristic that humans make in their cognitive processing. They basically associate both together. And based on that, this judgment happens. And if there is no fit, so we always talk about fit, right? So if you have an alliance, you have to have some certain, not only in capabilities and financial, etc., so that these things work, but actually also in terms of what is the perception. Do these organizations work together? And if you have this tension, what I understand here, that is, I understand. So there are strategies, communication strategies to work with that. I wouldn't, top of my head, I cannot just come with one, but it's something that definitely can be addressed. I would need more information as well, but can definitely be done. But it's good that you're already aware of it. That's already the first point.
half the battle.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's, if I may, Human's second question, I probably would refer to some marketing colleagues if we had them here, but we don't, sadly, but definitely can point you to things. But thank you. That's great, Michael. If there are any other questions anyone wants to add, please feel free to keep adding them. We can make sure we've just got a little bit of time at the end. So you know, if anything's still springing to mind, feel free to pop it in the chat and we'll revisit that in a few minutes. If I may, just to kind of, I suppose, start to wrap us up and just pick up on a few things Michael said, if we could go to the next slide, actually, as Michael very eloquently alluded to, we are running, or he is running, a crisis communication and management masterclass on the 31st of March, 2 till 5 p.m. It will be virtual. So if you've enjoyed and found helpful the stuff that Michael shared today, obviously in a 3-hour session, he'll be able to go into much more depth. And as he talked about, you know, kind of look at cases together and really interactively work on that with you. So we're running that virtually, so you can join us from wherever you may be. I don't know where everyone's joining us from today, but you know, if you can join us online at that time, then it's obviously available. And you know, as Michael talked about, you know, it will be about thinking around these frameworks and to be able to analyze emerging crises. And actually, as Michael said, I found this really interesting. Is something even a crisis at all? I think that was something that I'd not necessarily thought of, but definitely makes sense. And then, you know, thinking about the kind of reducing harm and gaining trust and mitigating the losses element there. We've got a question: is the masterclass live or recorded? It will be live. It's interactive. So that's one of the kind of, you know, important pieces of the teaching, is that we feel that, you know, people need to be there and to interact and to you know, join, share, discuss, as Michael talked about earlier. Often, you know, there's learning from each other as much as there is from Michael's wonderful expertise as well. So it is live attendance, and we hope that 2 till 5 slot in the afternoon means that you know, most people from around the world can join us if they want to. It'll be a relatively small group, which is nice. So you'll also have lots of chance to interact. It won't be just a solo transmission. You'll be able to, you know, get involved and get your hands dirty, for want of a better phrase. If we could just go to the next slide as well, just kind of leading on from that, moving slightly away from crisis communication now. We are also running a series of interesting masterclasses through the rest of this season, and just a little bit of information there about what those are. Jazz has asked a really good question, which is our details on the website. Yes, absolutely. So if you go to our website, you will find details of all of these masterclasses, and also in particular the crisis communication masterclass. And just to give you a flavour, these are the other ones that we've got planned, and Michael's actually developing a couple of other new ones as well that will be really interesting. So all of that will continue to go up on the website. So do check back, and you know, we're adding things all the time that may be interesting for you. But yeah, sign up on the website. It's a really easy process, and we will definitely be able to happy to have a chat with you. If you've got more questions, you can contact us via the website as well, but equally you can just register straight there. And if we could just go to the final slide, please, Michael, as well. I just wanted to take this opportunity to let you guys know that we also do slightly longer courses. So running virtually over the coming months, we have three courses upcoming: strategic marketing management. That might be one for Huma, actually, if you were thinking about how to do your marketing, you may be interested in that one. A mini MBA for in-house lawyers, obviously a bit more niche, that appeals to a certain group, but if any of you are in-house lawyers or know them, may be interesting for you. And then finance for strategic impact. And the idea with all of our courses is that they're designed to give you those skills to round out your leadership. So, you know, you'll be coming from an area maybe where you've got expertise and technical expertise and you've been working there, but the courses are designed to sort of help you think about making those next steps, or, you know, do well in those next steps. So it's about giving you that broader understanding of the organization as a whole, and kind of filling in gaps of knowledge and confidence and language that really help there. And they're all, again, super interactive, so you'll be meeting other people working on the same challenges as you, as well as our excellent faculty.
The other thing that Kate was going to go on to say was just to give a little bit more detail about some of our other programs that you might not be aware of. So we also, as well as the half-day online masterclasses, we run some online and in-person programs, and some of those coming up in the next few months you can see on screen now. So our strategic marketing management program, our mini MBA for in-house lawyers, and finance for strategic impact program, and those are really set the same kind of tone that Michael's been giving. So really practical programs focusing on your current work challenges, lots of practical takeaways, loads of opportunities to discuss in a sort of confidential environment, a practical environment with academics and people working in industry. Really get into the detailed discussion of what's going on in your own career, what's going on in your own role, and mix with other people that have similar challenges but potentially working in different industries, and walk away with maybe a different way of looking at things, as well as new skills and new knowledge. And again, I will send an email around to everyone and attach some information about some of those other courses. So I guess I'll just say a thank you from myself and Kate, and then I'll pass to Michael. So a final thank you for everybody that joined us today. We're running a series of these webinars, so that's something else I'll do. I'll just say I'll pop a note in with the other webinars. So they really give a taster of some of our programs, as well as some practical tips in themselves. Really pleased to have Michael here today to share some of his insight and expertise, and I hope everybody has enjoyed what they think. I don't know, Michael, if you just want to give a couple more thoughts.
Thanks everyone. Yes, no, I think we're good. Yeah, thank you for joining, and yeah, hope to see you in one of the courses. I think what I want to add is that what's always great is obviously to have also people from other companies, industries, interaction. I mean, we see also a lot of networking going on in these courses, so definitely also that's definitely an added benefit on top of it. And thanks everyone.